I got some interesting questions about mealworm farming from a gentleman out in Africa. And I'm here in the farm today to kind of walk through the answers I've got for those questions and give some feedback as best I can. So I'm going to run through those questions, and then I'm going to go through, I printed it out so that I can go through and answer all of them. My memory is not the best, so this will help me, and you just kind of have to deal with me having to read through this. So the question revolves around producing enough pupa and beetles to maintain and expand a colony. That's the general gist of this. And so what this person asked is, do I have any advice regarding how to create a consistent supply of beetles to the extent of creating a new beetle tray each week? My problem is figuring out how to batch the pupa in large enough quantities within that first week to add a full tray to the colony. Should I be keeping the collected pupa in the fridge? Is it safe, and for how long? How long do they need to be thawed in order to pupate and then be entered into the farm? Is there an optimal route? Really good questions. One of the things that I'm going to start with is answering the pupa in the fridge question. I have not had success by putting pupa in the fridge. What I find is that dries them out. The death rate goes up considerably. I just haven't found a good solution for slowing down pupa whenever they get to that stage, with the intended goal being to get the pupa, but then separate out the time frame of those beetles hatching, right? Lots of people have tried this. There's several folks that have brought it up in the mealworm farming co-op group. So it's not just me that has this issue. It's a universal thing where cooling those pupa just generally creates a lot more die-off, and it's not worth it. Instead, refrigerate the larvae. So if you put those larvae in, they do far better in cold storage, and then you can pull them out as you need them, right? If you have to go that route. But let's walk through what I do, and then know that you can use that cold storage as a stopgap when you need it in order to slow down those larger larvae from pupating and start to create your cycle, okay? Let's start first by going through how I manage all of these beetle trays. And all of these are beetle trays, including these shorter stacks here. There's approximately 180 of these right now, but what you're looking at is this row way down here. That's the oldest row. And then every row that comes this way, or every column that comes this way is 1 week younger. So my youngest beetles are up here. These are the ones that just hatched. And my hatchery is right back there. So that's where all the beetles hatch out. The reason I stagger them like this is that I will do a beetle swap every week. I used to do it every 2 weeks. Now I do it every week. It's just a time thing. Both will work fine. This is really efficient for us from a process perspective to get consistent results in production every week. So that's why we do it every week. If you do it every 2 weeks, then your production is going to vary every 2 weeks, right? But what we're doing is every week we'll take this oldest stack. So these are the oldest beetles. They're about 3 months old. We'll take those, we'll separate the beetles out. We'll put the brand back in, add brand in. Those go into the system back there to grow out. And the beetles that were in those oldest trays, they go to the chickens. So once they hit that 3 month time frame, they are spent beetles. They have laid 95% or more of their eggs, and it's not worth keeping them in these trays to produce anymore because we can replace them with fresh beetles, right? And so how do we do that? What we built is a system where we are continuously starting fresh trays of larvae to pupate and collecting fresh pupa every week. And so right next to all of these beetle trays is our larva to pupa. And so right now there's 133 of these trays. Usually we have about another 4 stacks here. I've toned down the beetle production a little bit because we produce more than we need to. A general good rule of thumb is 10% of your trays for beetles, 10% of your trays for pupa creation. But we're actually going to go a bit lower because right now we only have 133 trays of larvae turning to pupa, and we're running a rotation of about 3,000 trays right now. So it's far lower than that 10% threshold, right? But do 10%. Start with 10%. That's what I was doing for a while. You're going to have die-off. You're going to have issues. Figure out if you're producing too many beetles, and then either slow that down with refrigeration or just hold back less larvae. Okay? But what we'll do is every week we are starting a new stack of large larvae to become pupa. And then every week, very similar to the beetles, where when those beetles get too old, they're gone. These older trays, you can see in here, this is just a lot of frass and wheat bran. There's some larvae in here, but they aren't changing over as they get older. These aren't producing as well, right? Compared to, let's see if we can find a better tray. This here, you can see all the larvae, even not zoomed in here, you can see all the larvae, they're transitioning and becoming pupa. And so as the tray ages, after we've started the large larva in there, once it gets to a certain age, and certain age for me is still undefined. We just started tracking recently how long it takes for a tray to go through that, a pupa tray to go through that whole process and be spent or done, to where we've got larvae there that just aren't pupating for some reason, and so it's not worth keeping that tray around. Right now I'm putting about 3,000 large larvae in each one of those trays. I don't track the pupa that come out of each individual tray. It's not worth the time and the labor that it would take to track all of that, so we do it at a larger scale, right? We just want to make sure that we have, my goal is to have at least 125-ish trays at the moment, again, because I've scaled back selling the beetles. And we're getting much less die-off than we have in the past. And I think that's contributed to adding moisture to the bins. When it was just me, I would have days where I would just be spent, I would be done, couldn't get to the things on the list, and these guys wouldn't get hydrated. And so we had a lot of die-off of the pupa before they would become beetles. Now that I have part-time help, whenever she's in here and I'm in here, we're able to hit these things on the checklist that really should be happening but aren't vital. And so now we're getting way more hatched beetles, which is a good thing, but we just don't need as many, so we're running less trays, right? And so the trick to this is to start these larva trays and be patient and wait, but start them consistently every week or every 2 weeks, whatever your cycle is going to be, so that you're producing beetles every week to, in my case, replace an entire stack, which is now 19 trays. We're up to 19, 18 or 19 of 2,000 beetles each. So we always start a fresh stack of larvae that are going to start pupating, and that way we always have pupa coming out and then subsequently beetles hatching. It's better to produce more than you need, and then just cull those back, feed them off to the chickens, get rid of them in some manner. But it's better to have more and work into that than to have less and not be able to sustain or grow your colony size. So the one thing I want to key in on from the email here is that your goal is not to start a stack of larvae to produce pupa and then stop. Your goal is to start a stack this week and then start another one next week and next week and next week. You're always going to be starting fresh stacks or trays, right? Depending on how many you're producing or how many you're wanting to do. You're always going to be starting a fresh batch. That's probably a good way to look at it. A fresh batch of larvae to pupate every week. Now, it is true that if, as I create these trays, like I said, of 3,000 each tray here, they're not all going to pupate at the same time. I'm going to get some this week, I'm going to get some next week, right? I think the oldest stack here is about a month and a half old. So over the course of that month and a half, this stack will produce pupa every week, right? But they're not doing it all at once. It's happening over time. And so what that does for us is it does mean we have to maintain these trays and hydrate them, keep them labeled so that we know what age they are, and honestly when to stop with those trays, because these older trays still have larvae in them. But at some point it got to where like they were here for 3 months and still hadn't pupated. And so we started putting dates on everything and scaled back the number of trays that we keep once they get older, because they just aren't producing anything. Now that's just to maintain your colony size, right? If you want to increase your colony size, that means you're going to need to increase your beetle count. And you're going to need to then remember that once those beetles get old enough, they're gone, you're going to need to maintain whatever pupa production that you get to for that fresher stack once you get here. So let's say, for example, you can see the height of these, right? This is 19, these are 18. Let's say these were 10, right? It takes far more larvae to produce the pupa and the beetles for these extra 9. So once these start to get older, I need to make sure that I've got pupa production that's going to keep up with the demand I'm going to have when this large stack goes away. So I need 19 times 2,000 beetles in each tray. I need that to hatch every week out of pupa collected from these guys, right? You're not going to know what those numbers are until you start tracking it. So if you've got a small number of trays and you can track at the tray level, go ahead and do that to see how many beetles you get out of each tray, how much larvae you put in when you start, and that way you get an idea of what your die-off rate is, right? What your success rate or what your benchmark is. Make sure you hydrate them. We hydrate these guys twice a week with water gel crystal just to make sure they stay hydrated and stay healthy, and that really increased our success rate of pupa hatching to beetles. And then you're going to need to keep track of how many trays of beetles are you running, and are you able to produce that number of beetles necessary to replace, to make sure you've got pupa trays accounted for. Because what you're going to get caught in is, especially if you're running this as a business, you're going to get caught in sales. You're going to be seeing those dollars. You're going to be getting those sales, and you're going to be very, very, very tempted to go ahead and just sell stock, to sell your large larvae. And you need to be disciplined about that to save those so that you don't sacrifice your beetle trays and your colony size because you sell too many of your larvae. A good rule of thumb is the 10-10-10, right? So you've got 10% trays for your beetles, 10% for your pupation trays. Do 10% of whatever you harvest from your trays. Keep 10% of that large amount for yourself to pupate and become beetles and keep your colony going. If you're wanting to expand, you're going to need more than 10%. And then you need to remember that those trays that let's say you go from 1 tray of beetles to 4 trays of beetles. When those 4 trays of beetles age out, you're going to need to replace all 4 of those, right? So you're going to need to make sure that you have ramped up and scaled up and keep putting that number of, or that percentage of large larvae, away. And one way to save that or to stock up on that is to use that refrigeration method on your larvae. Don't use it on your pupa, but take your larvae, throw them in the fridge, throw them in cold storage, they'll slow down, and then pull them out. They'll get acclimated, they'll start warming up. There'll probably be a little delay in pupation just because, they've hibernated, they've gone into lethargy. Give them some time, so pull them out maybe a week to 2 weeks early before you need them to start pupating. Get them into a tray, get them hydrated, get them fed, and then they'll start pupating. So hopefully that helps a little bit with managing your beetle trays. And honestly, it comes down to managing your pupation trays. That's the key. Make sure that you are collecting data and then analyzing that data just to see how your numbers are panning out. Because what you don't want to do is get caught to the point where you start having less production of pupa into beetles and can't maintain that colony size. Okay. Any questions about this, please drop them below. Shoot me an email. Hopefully this was helpful, and have a good one.